Hi, it's Katrina! From enormous sea monsters waiting to feed on helpless maidens to the father of all monsters with 100 heads, here are 10 of the most powerful and terrifying creatures from Greek mythology. Number 10. Cetus. The Greeks had several versions of dragons, and not all of them had wings. There were giant dragons that lived in the sea known as Cetus or Ketus. The Cetus was an enormous sea monster depicted as a dragon or a serpent-like fish. Two of the most famous in history went to battle with our favorite heroes, Perseus and Heracles. As the legend goes, Perseus was on his journey home after slaying the monster Medusa when he saw the Ethiopian princess Andromeda chained to the rocks. Her mother, Queen Cassiopeia, boasted that she and her daughter Andromeda were the most beautiful in the land, even more beautiful than the Nereids, or sea nymphs, which angered Poseidon. He punished Ethiopia by flooding the land and sending the sea monster Cetus to terrify the people. An oracle told the king and queen that the only way to get rid of the monster was to sacrifice their daughter Andromeda. When Perseus found her and learned of her plight, he vowed to rescue her. As Cetus emerged from the water to devour her, Perseus blinded it with Medusa's head, turning the creature to stone. The Cetus appears again in Troy. The Trojan Cetus was a giant sea monster sent by the god Poseidon to plague the land of Troy after King Laomedon refused to pay him for building the city's walls. The gods Poseidon and Apollo had been exiled from Mount Olympus for plotting against Zeus and went to Troy in disguise. Poseidon had promised the king he would help build impenetrable walls, while Apollo would take care of the livestock which multiplied under his care. When they came for payment, the king refused and kicked them out of the kingdom, not knowing who he was messing with. Apollo sent a horrible plague, and Poseidon sent a tsunami and then unleashed the Trojan Cetus so no one could enter the water. Just like with Andromeda, the king went to an oracle who told him the only way to be rid of the monster was to sacrifice his daughter Hesiod. She was chained to the rocks to await the beast. However, Heracles arrived at Troy and went to the king, offering to save his daughter and kill the Trojan Cetus in exchange for a golden vine and some divine horses. The powerful monster appeared, but it was no match for Heracles, who unleashed tons of arrows, making the monster fall. Then he took his mighty club and dealt the monster a final blow. Side note, the king also refused to pay Heracles, which would later prove deadly as Heracles would come back seeking revenge. Number 9. The Chimera. The Chimera is a female three-headed monster in Greek mythology that can breathe fire. It is a combination of three animals in one. With the body of a lion in the front, the midsection of a goat on its back with a goat head on top, and the tail of a dragon or a serpent ending with a snake's head, the Chimera is strong, fast, and terrifying. It ravaged the countryside of Lycia in Anatolia. This monster was fierce and dangerous in battle, with its scorching fire hot enough to melt armor and weaponry. Its fearsome limbs and sharp claws adopted from the lioness make it not only an incredibly fast runner, but gives it the ability to shred its enemies. With its serpent's tail, the Chimera is also able to inject victims with a deadly venom that renders them helpless. The creature, whose name typically means she-goat, appears in many Greek legends. Born out of the fires of Mount Chimera in southern Turkey, the deadly creature was finally defeated by the hero Bellerophon with the help of his winged horse, Pegasus. Number 8. Nemean Lion. You may not have heard of the Nemean lion, but you have heard of Heracles. A powerful warrior, part of the Heracles myths includes stories about the lion hide he often wore. But there was something more to that piece of clothing. It wasn't just for fashion's sake, it was a piece of armor that was said to come from the fierce beast known as the Nemean lion. A giant creature with impenetrable skin, the Nemean lion lived in a cave in Nemea. It was said to roam the hills and kill people and their livestock. Its golden hide was impenetrable, and the weapons of mortals would bounce off, just making the creature angry. Said to be twice the size of an average lion, it had the strength of 10 creatures and claws that were sharper than swords. It was considered to be a child of Typhon and Echidna, the parents of practically all monsters. The lion would kidnap women from Nemea and hide them in its lair to lure warriors hoping to rescue them. When they got close, the woman would turn into a lion and kill him. But that doesn't mean the lion could not be defeated. Sent by King Eurystheus to kill the lion, it is now famous as the first labor of Heracles. He set out to find the creature that local villagers said was not simply a lion, but a monster. Continuing on his journey, Heracles found huge paw prints and followed them to a vast mountain range. When he found the lion's lair, he realized the task would be more difficult than anticipated. After taking out his bow and arrow and aiming at the lion's forehead, Heracles' arrow bounced off without harming the creature. He took another shot to the lion's throat, but the arrows again bounced right off. Realizing the opponent was no ordinary lion, Heracles came up with a plan to smoke out the lion from where it was hiding. When the lion emerged from the cave, he clubbed the creature on the head and then hurled himself onto its neck. After strangling the lion to death with his bare hands, Heracles skinned it and took its hides, covering himself with them to take advantage of their protective qualities. Number 7. Cerberus. In ancient Greek mythology, the underworld was a scary place, and a scary place needs a scary watchdog. It was guarded by a monstrous canine with 3 heads named Cerberus. Dogs were depicted as wild animals in the ancient world, roaming the streets in packs and scavenging for food. So it makes sense that the Greeks would take the fearsome qualities of the ancient canine and attribute them to Cerberus, one of the most feared creatures in all of Hades. Cerberus was famous for his many heads, although over time he was described as having 3 dog heads, snakes spurting from his back, with a venomous serpent's tail and the claws of a lion. Each of his heads represents a certain time, sometimes the past, the present, and the future. Other times they are symbolic of birth, youth, and old age. But it isn't Cerberus's snakes, claws, or serpent's tail that make him so feared. It was his look, so dreadful that like the Gorgon Medusa, it could turn a person into stone. Couple that with his razor-sharp teeth and poisonous bite, and Cerberus was one nightmarish creature to be avoided. This deadly monster in Greek mythology was the child of Typhon, a huge fire-breathing dragon with 100 heads. As the watchdog of the Greek underworld, Cerberus was a faithful servant to the god Hades. His favorite place to hang out was along the banks of the river Styx, the river that designated the boundary between Earth and the underworld. Being in the underworld was bad enough, but knowing that Cerberus was there to prevent the dead from escaping and the living from entering without his master's permission, you might not want to challenge the hellhound. The last and most difficult labor of Heracles was bringing Cerberus up from the underworld. Even though he was bitten by the venomous serpent tail, Heracles managed to choke him so that the creature passed out. Another famous story is that of Orpheus, who went to the underworld to look for his beloved Eurydice. He was able to charm the beast with his music. Featured in many works of ancient literature, Cerberus was written about in Dante's Inferno and also in works by Plato. Similar creatures can be found in other cultures, including one in Norse mythology who had a 4-eyed dog named Garm. In ancient Egypt, Anubis, the dog who guarded tombs and conducted the souls to the underworld, is also similar to Cerberus. Number 6. Typhon. Known as the father of all monsters, Typhon was an enormous fire-breathing dragon with 100 heads. Married to Echidna, the mother of all monsters, Typhon is the father to many of the most feared creatures in Greek mythology, including the Sphinx, the Nemean lion, and Cerberus. He was so huge, his head brushed the stars. But Typhon was not just a monster, he was also a god. One of the most fearsome deities the ancient Greeks could ever face, Typhon was a giant who was so tall that he reached the sky. With the torso of a man and legs made from coiling vipers that would hiss and attack as he moved, his main head had 100 snake heads that would make different animal sounds, and he could breathe fire. With hundreds of wings on his body and hands made from 100 snake coils, some of Typhon's heads were also dragons, which makes sense considering many of his children were equally monstrous. Engaging in many battles with Zeus in ancient mythology, Typhon attempted to overthrow Zeus for the supremacy of the cosmos. He destroyed cities and used his incredible strength to throw mountains, and then went after Mount Olympus. After a 10,000-year battle, Zeus was able to defeat him as he struck Typhon with 100 lightning bolts and cast him into the bottomless pit of Tartarus. Then, Zeus put Mount Etna on top so Typhon would never be able to escape. Some believe that volcanic eruptions are the result of Typhon's anger. Number 5. Scylla. A sea monster who lives on the rocks of a narrow water channel, Scylla, or Scylla, has been described as a frightful creature that has the shell of a crab, 6 long necks, and 3 rows of teeth on each head. With 12 feet that dangle from her hideous body, the philosopher Homer describes Scylla as having a voice that sounded like yelping dogs. But Scylla didn't start out that way. Originally a ravishing nymph, Scylla had milky skin and hair and a sweet face that caused many men to fall in love with her. but it was her beauty that would ultimately lead to her doom. Out of jealousy, the witch Circe poisoned the water and turned her into a monster. When she entered the water, her legs were transformed into a nest of snarling dogs, and she sprouted a long tail with scales and spikes like a dragon. Known for her endless greed and ferocious strength, Scylla was said to terrorize ancient Greeks when they passed through a narrow ocean strait along with the monster Charybdis, gobbling up sailors and driving ships to a watery grave, including some of Odysseus's men. Number 4. Charybdis. While the monster Scylla lives on one side of a deadly strait, Charybdis lives on the other, hiding in caves located on treacherous cliffs and using her long neck to swoop down and pluck sailors from their ships. Similar to Scylla, Charybdis was once a beautiful nymph born to the great sea god Poseidon. When Poseidon went to war with Zeus, she would help flood the land, swallowing up villages and forests. Responsible for the ebb and flow of the tides throughout the world, she attracted the attention of Zeus, who hated her. He vowed to stop her forever and made her into a monster. She had a wide gaping mouth and flippers. 3 times a day, she swallowed large amounts of water, creating dangerous whirlpools. Hundreds of sailors drowned trying to pass by her. On the other side of the Strait of Messina was Scylla. The two monsters terrorized sailors as they could easily be snatched from their ships if they got too close, but the channel was very narrow, so by avoiding one monster, they usually were attacked by the other. When Odysseus traveled through the strait, he lost many men to Scylla, and a powerful storm destroyed his ship, forcing him back into the strait on a raft where Charybdis almost swallowed him whole. He leapt to safety by hanging onto a tree. Number 3. Talos. There were many giants in Greek mythology, but one called Talos was an automaton, a living statue who was the last of the ancient bronze race of man. A race of animated metal statues of animals, men, and monsters, the automatons were crafted by the god Hephaestus, who is the Olympian god of fire, craftsmanship, metalworking, stonemasonry, and sculpture. Given by Zeus to his lover Europa, the giant was in charge of patrolling the island of Crete, circling it 3 times a day to drive off pirates with volleys of rocks. Also known as the god of the sun, Talos was often depicted in classical artwork as a handsome young man carved from bronze. Although you might think a giant man made of bronze would be immortal, Talos had one weakness. In his ankle, there was a single vein containing all of his life fluid known as the blood of the gods. Sealed with a thin membrane of skin, this weakness would turn out to be his downfall. When the Argonauts arrived at Crete looking for a safe place to shelter, Talos began throwing rocks at them. Medea, the wife of mythical Argonaut hero Jason, exploited the weakness by bewitching Talos to graze his ankle on a sharp rock, after which he bled to death. Sometimes depicted as a bronze bull or a man with a bull's head, Talos, despite his larger-than-life appearance, still became a victim of his one vulnerability. Number 2. Cyclops. The one-eyed monsters of Greek mythology known as the Cyclops were a giant race of lawless creatures. Cyclops, meaning round eye, were the workmen of the god Hephaestus, who had a workshop in the heart of Mount Etna. The Cyclops were described by Homer as wild savages who lived in the southern part of Sicily. They were known to eat human beings and lived in caves with their wives and children. One of the Cyclops, known as Polyphemus, was a man-eating monster who fell in love with a nymph called Galatea, but rejected by Galatea, Polyphemus grew enraged and killed Acis, the man of Galatea's affections, on a massive rock. Captured by the Greek hero Odysseus, whose only escape came about by blinding the giant, his blood formed a stream which still has his name today. Greek historian Hesiod mentions 3 Cyclopes in his writings: Arges, who represented the thunderbolt, Steropes, the lightning, and Brontes, the thunder. All 3 were storm deities who, after being freed by Zeus, later gave him their weapons of thunder and lightning, continuing as his smiths and forging thunderbolts for him at Mount Olympus. Some historians believe the idea of the Cyclops came from Greek blacksmiths who used eye patches to protect their eyes while forging, although most likely it is from the enormous skulls of Deinotherium giganteum, a distant relative of today's elephants. Cyclops are credited with building gigantic fortification walls that still exist at Mycenaean sites to this day. Known as the children of earth and sky, they were believed to inhabit in a faraway land without law, living a simple existence herding sheep and goats before later being known as violent monstrosities. Number 1. Argus Panoptes. Another well-known giant in Greek mythology, Argus Panoptes was a creature that was said to have 100 eyes. With superhuman strength that he used to defeat other creatures, Argus was a servant for the goddess Hera. Some stories detail his fight with Echidna, the half-woman, half-snake monster, while she was asleep in her cave. Another time, Argus was sent to kill a bull that was attacking Arcadia, one of the original regions of Greece. When Argus slept, he always had at least one eye open, a trait that came to be known as the all-seeing eye, and his ability to perceive things from any angle. Usually shown as a monster in Greek art, he was not only a giant but a god who had super abilities. One of the most famous stories of Panoptes was when he was told to guard a cow for Zeus, because the cow, Io, was once one of Zeus's lovers. When Zeus sent Hermes to save the cow for him, Hermes bewitched Argus by playing a tune for him on a panpipe. When the giant fell asleep, Hermes was able to slay him. Once dead, each of his eyes were taken and placed on the tail of the peacock, which came to be known as a symbol of the goddess Hera, who recognized Argus for his service to her. Thanks for watching! Be sure to subscribe and let me know your favorite monster in the comments below. See you later! Bye!